My grandparents, they live on the same property as me. And so I was outside and they were driving by and grandma rolls down the window and she yells, "Hey, do you know your grandpa's gonna be 82 tomorrow?" And I walk over to the car and I lean in and I said, "That reminds me. I have a bone to pick with both of you. Because if the good die young, you guys weren't as good as you said you were." Grandpa was laughing. Grandma did not find this humorous, not one little bit. She was not amused. However, I was hysterical. There's another time, I was sitting on grandma's front porch and I was smoking a cigarette. She comes around the corner and she goes, "Is that a Camel White?" I said, "It is." And she's like, "That's the worst cigarette you could smoke." I said who? And besides, grandpa said if I was going to do something to do it right the first time. Grandpa's like, "You use everything against us, every single thing." Because earlier that day, she had asked me why I started drinking coffee. And I said, "Well, grandpa said not to drink coffee because it would stunt your growth." Well, then he started telling me I was getting too big for my britches and I had to do something. She just nodded her head with a shake and walked away. One time, grandpa and I were sitting in the living room and I was bored. So I looked over at grandpa and I said, "Hey," I'm whispering too because I didn't want grandma to hear me because she runs me. I knew grandpa's fun. Anyways, I was like, "So, hey, grandpa, tell me, when you and grandma used to date, did you pick up cans and say, 'Hey, we're raising dinosaurs today and I'm Brontosaurus Rex?'" And he said, "No, I was T Rex." And I was like, "Well, I thought you would have let grandma win once or twice." And he's like, "Nope, I always win." Grandma walks in the room and she's like, "What are you talking about?" We're like, "Nothing. Nothing, nothing, no." Grandpa just has a little smirk under his lot. She's like, "Hey, you too. Or Brandy, do you know that when I married your grandpa, I only weighed 98 pounds?" And I looked at her and I said, "Well, I would hope so. You were only 3 feet tall." And she went, I said, "Well, you're not much taller now." Grandpa spits his coffee out across the room. It was hilarious. And here's a picture of my grandma's and my son, who is 6 foot something. And just for the context, one time we were sitting at the table and waiting for grandma to bring us breakfast. And we were talking, and I had just moved to Oklahoma. And I said, "So, grandpa, where do people go fishing around here?" And he said, "Oh, I see those Hummers down there by the Cimarron River." I said, "Really? Do they use their front wheels or their back wheels?" And he said, "They're four-wheel drive." Right, right. Grandma sets a plate down hastily on the table and she says, "I don't think either one of you are funny." And I looked at her and or I looked at grandpa and I said, "That's because she can't hear us." This woman also, she says she can't hear. Like she's deaf in one ear and has been my whole life, right? I have a friend at her house and we're sitting there talking and they asked what time it was. And I whispered, and grandma's a decent ways away from me. And I whispered in this person's ear, "I don't know, because my grandma doesn't have any clocks. She doesn't believe in time." She said, "I do too. There's one on the stove, there's one on the microwave." And she's going off. This is so funny. Grandma thought you couldn't hear. I heard that. I heard that. I swear that woman has all her life had selective hearing.